Okay, welcome. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all here. Um, glad you're here, first of all, and I just want to welcome you all. And my name is Mia. I'm a member of the Robbinsdale for Racial Justice group, and I'm a resident in Ward 3 near Lee Park. And we are having our second conversation with Mr. Jason Greenberg, our Robbinsdale Ward 2 City Council candidate. And thank you, Jason, for speaking with us again today.
Yeah.
So the intention of our meeting is to continue our conversation about racial justice and equity issues as they pertain to our elected officials ahead of our general election on November 3rd. And members of the Robbinsdale for Racial Justice group have come up with a few more questions, and we presented these questions to Jason a few days ago. And we're here to listen and become better informed voters. And for those of us who are white members of the community, we're here to be better allies to our neighbors who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We will allow space for follow-up questions from the audience at the end, as usual, and white people will defer and listen to BIPOC members when they have something to say. And this meeting is recorded. It will be posted with our previous candidate conversation. So if you'd like to view our first conversation with Jason, you can search R for RJ on YouTube. That's R number 4 RJ. And we'll just keep microphones off at the beginning of the meeting as usual, but you're more than welcome to put questions into the chat, and then we'll connect with those questions later. So we'll try to keep our meeting to 45 minutes, and we'll invite Jason to give us an introduction, and then I'll jump into questions. And we should, as I said, we should have time at the end for more follow-up. So yes, Jason, thank you so much for sitting down with us again today. Do you mind giving us a little introduction of yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. And if you did not see, so I was in a primary, so there was sort of the first round of this. If you didn't see that and you don't know anything about me, I've lived in Robbinsdale for 13 years. With my wife, and I have 2 daughters who are age 13 and 10, or actually 11. She just turned 11. And then I've been on the Planning Commission. I've been involved with the Blue Line Extension Community Advisory Committee. I've been involved with Lakeview Elementary and helping with our community schools. And really, I mean, I'm running for city council to represent the voices of Ward 2. And I think it goes without saying that, you know, as it relates to this group, I'm a white guy, and I know that we're all here to support racial justice. And with that in mind, I mean, I think that for a lot of people, diversity on the city council is a very important issue. And if that's the case, you're going to vote for Sheila, and I totally support that and understand that viewpoint. And I think for me, this is really about sharing my opinions, which are just that. They're my point of view. They're my answers to these questions, but they're not hard and fast rules that I'm some expert. You know, it's a conversation. So hopefully we can have a little bit of a discussion on things that maybe I don't know as much about, but you know, definitely I'm excited to answer the questions and talk with the group.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, and as all of us in the group, we're all here to learn as well. So I don't view myself as an expert. I'm sure no one here does either. So again, thanks for that.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned earlier, we have questions around 6 topics that the group submitted and organized in advance. And by the way, for transparency's sake, so these same questions are asked in the same order to any other candidates who meet with our group. And we should have plenty of time per question. So feel free to elaborate as you like, and then we'll hold off on any follow-up questions until the end. But again, if you know, you mentioned wanting to have a more open discussion. So if anyone in the audience, if you want to, you know, ask questions in real time in the chat, you know, Jason, feel free to address those if you like. Otherwise, we'll get to them at the end. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
All right, so I'll jump in with our first question here. So the amount of unchecked power held by the city manager is alarming to many members of the Robbinsdale for Racial Justice group and is directly related to racial inequity in Robbinsdale. What are your thoughts on Robbinsdale's current government structure? And do you have any adjustments you'd like to see to work toward equity for BIPOC? And what are they?
Yeah. So for those who don't know, we have a council manager structure, which is one of a handful that are approved structures within the state of Minnesota. There's like a strong mayor, which is like Minneapolis. And so I don't know that I like, from a structure standpoint, have a major issue with the way our government is set up, because if you look at the communities around us, St. Louis Park, Brooklyn Park, Golden Valley, New Hope, and they're all set up with the council manager structure. And so I think, as far as my opinion on it and adjustments, it's really about communication and making sure that people are aware of what's going on in the city, that we're getting, I mean, it seems to me like the city makes announcements, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's on, through mail or whatever it is, but that there's not a ton of engagement in a lot of that communication. So I think, to me, it's about finding better ways or more ways of getting that communication out, of what the city is doing, what's going on, and making sure that not only what they're sharing, the information from an education standpoint, but also getting out there and listening to what people have to say. Because I think that that's kind of the other piece, is that it's, people have lots of ideas. In Robbinsdale, I mean, I've been out and talking, and I've talked to hundreds of residents, and everybody kind of has their own viewpoint. So it's coming back to communication. It's not just telling everyone, it's also making sure that we're listening to the different voices and meeting people, I guess, where they're at, or, so to me, it's the setup of the city is consistent with a bunch of other cities in the metro area. It's really more about like, how are we getting our information out, and what we can do to improve that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, the next question, this question has many parts to it, so I'm going to read through the entire thing and then we can tackle each part.
Sure.
So when discussing racial equity, it's also important to think about the intersection of Black and Brown lives and the lives of the LGBTQ community. First, would you support flying a pride flag at City Hall or on the light posts downtown? Would you support flying a Black Lives Matter flag? And if you don't agree with the BLM flag or banner, would you support a Blue Lives Matter flag or banner, and why? And then finally, how would you respond to criticism from residents regarding this? So that's the full question. Maybe we can start with the pride flag portion of that.
Yeah, I mean, pride and BLM to some extent, it's, I personally don't have any problems flying those flags or supporting those communities. I think when you look at the city council, though, it's not just about like what I personally believe or what I personally think is right. It's a larger community. And like I said, I mean, I've been out talking to people, and not everyone agrees with all of those things, and some more than others. And that doesn't mean that we just like completely ignore them, but at the same time, or those issues, we don't ignore the fact that we support, racial equity and Black Lives Matter or pride for the LGBTQ community, where I sort of think of it as like the other side of that. Is so like Blue Lives Matter. I mean, I totally support the police, but I think that there are connotations that could be thought of as negative with a Blue Lives Matter flag that isn't just about supporting the police. It's about other things too. And so it's from that perspective that I say, well, what if people wanted to fly those flags? Like, I don't personally really want those to be flown. I don't want a Confederate flag flown at City Hall or downtown. And so I mean, maybe it's just because of this election season or what's going on in the country right now, but it just feels like there's a lot of divisive stuff within Robbinsdale. And so, again, from my own personal support, totally support Pride, totally support Black Lives Matter. But I do know there are voices in our community that are not in agreement with that and that actually have opposing views that they probably would want to express. And so I guess I think about it from a city perspective of, you know, freedom of speech, and you can't tell someone that they, you know, I can have a conversation with someone and explain to them like why what they're thinking might be misguided and try to explain some different perspectives. But if you're flying a flag, you're not in a conversation per se. And so I think I don't want to necessarily get in the middle of sowing division when there already is plenty of that. But at the same time, it's like, you know, if there was like a pride parade in Robbinsdale, which I think is totally possible, well, then maybe we do have flags for that event, right? Or for that celebration. But that just to like put flags up to say, you know, this side or the other, like this is something that I personally agree with and we should do it. It's kind of, you know, I want to make sure that I'm representing the voices of Ward 2, and that, even though it saddens me, it you know, it does represent people that don't necessarily agree with all of those things, right? And I guess yeah.
So with that being said, I mean, you mentioned the divisiveness, and we understand that no matter what the decision is, there will be some criticism, right? So the last part of that question is around how do you deal with the criticism around these topics or that decision?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's like I think that we need to have a just society. We need to have an open community that respects all kinds of different people. And so, you know, again, I can communicate that and have a conversation and work with people that maybe are, again, it goes kind of back to the whole idea of like communication, and my number one area of focus is community connections. And that's where it's like, once you know someone and you see them as a person instead of an other, then it's like a totally different conversation. So it's more about getting people connected together and finding ways to do that. But yeah, does that answer? I think that answers the question. That's one way to deal with criticism. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to move on to our next question then. So we, as a group, we acknowledge racism is systemic in our nation and in our city. What particular systems in Robbinsdale strike you as underserving or perhaps even actively harming our BIPOC community? And what thoughts or plans do you propose to address them?
So I think one is around public transportation and the Blue Line extension. And, you know, obviously I've been involved with that, being on the community advisory committee. And, you know, just a lot of the news recently is around that they've changed the plan and that's not going to happen. And so making sure, I mean, we're still trying to move forward and finding ways to make sure that Robbinsdale is included in that. So I know that that's not like specifically like just Robbinsdale, but I think access to public transportation is an important one. And I think that is something that we need to focus on and making sure that we're serving the community. And I think having the light rail that runs from downtown and includes Robbinsdale is just a major priority to continue to find ways to make sure that that happens. I think another place is just around our community schools. So I, you know, as a parent who has children that, well, one is in Lakeview and one is going to Robbinsdale, and just being involved in the community, I've heard lots of stories about rumors and things that they've heard that are, you know, sort of a negative experience about our community schools. And so making sure that, you know, we educate people so that, I mean, being on the city council, it's not my place to tell anyone what the right choice is for their student. But I do know that there are a lot of parents that make choices and are not necessarily, they're basically opening and enrolling in some other, whether it's a charter school or another school, without actually really considering what our community schools are. And I think that that impacts the community of those schools, which is, as it impacts our BIPOC community because they're part of those schools. So that's definitely a piece. And then, I know that it's come up in other conversations, and just, the racial covenants that exist in Robbinsdale. I mean, that is more from a symbolic standpoint, but the idea that, if people find that hurtful or realize that they have that on there, I mean, there is a process to do it, but just making sure people are more educated on what that means. I know that the city council is already working towards working with the county, but just making sure that people have all the information. If there's anything we can do from a city standpoint to work with the county to find a way to eradicate those, because every time someone does that on their title, to get that removed, that's like a process, and it costs money. And it's like, well, we know a lot of people and I would say everyone in Robbinsdale wants to get rid of these racial covenants. So, is there another way to maybe address them that's at a higher level, as opposed to each individual homeowner?
Right. Yeah. I think many members of the group have been following along with that issue in particular. So thanks for speaking to that a little bit too.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Our next question: what are the community, governmental, and logistical obstacles that you anticipate having when working toward racial equity?
So, from my perspective, racial equity is obviously something that we're considering in Robbinsdale and putting a lot of thought into. But at the same time, it's also a very complex issue that goes beyond Robbinsdale and includes national and state governments, companies that are local and national and international. It involves nonprofits. It involves, it's all the way down to local city governments like Robbinsdale. So to me, I think the challenge is how does racial equity and the disparities, how do they impact people, and where is the intersection of the things that go way beyond Robbinsdale intersect with it's impacting people in Robbinsdale? And so there are stories, I've been to forums and meetings where people have expressed that they feel like they're being profiled. And so that's something that we need to eradicate and work to improve. So to me, from my perspective, I think it's understanding that some of this, we could do everything we possibly could in Robbinsdale, and it's still, it maybe helps in Robbinsdale, but it doesn't address the root cause and some of the larger systemic issues that we're dealing with. That doesn't mean let's not do anything. There are still plenty of things we can do within Robbinsdale that impact Robbinsdale, and I just gave an example. But I think, to me, that's like one of, that's a way of putting it in context for me anyway. I do think, as I look at Robbinsdale as a community, one of the issues that we've run into, and I just kind of talked about it earlier, but it's like hearing from the actual community, and that conversation that needs to happen. So I think that there are people within Robbinsdale that don't think that they have any issues with race, and that there's no racism as far as they're concerned. And it's, so there's a major education curve from our own community to make sure that people understand what's really going on in the world. And on the flip side of that, also making sure that we're hearing from our BIPOC community, because as much as there are issues that are happening, it's like you go to a forum, it's not mainly BIPOC, it's people that are representing those voices, and that's important. But we need to hear from those people when those issues are happening, because that's how we're going to get rid of it. So I see that as some, those are major challenges. And then I think there's an element of, just when you're talking about the city, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, from my perspective, it's like, let's just make this happen now. We can get rid of all of these things. But the reality is that, like, in a city government and in any government that's representing people that have different viewpoints, it doesn't always happen that way. And so there are going to be compromises. And so I think that there is a challenge of, like, what are the compromises that make enough progress, right, that get us in the right place, without feeling like we abandon the cause.
Right.
Does that make sense? Like, it's, if it's not all one way or all the other way, then we're talking about a compromise. Well, where is the line that makes us feel as a community, and shows that as a community we're moving forward and we're making progress, but that isn't so much of a compromise that, like, we didn't really do anything. I mean, I've heard people talk about, getting more minorities on the police force. Well, it's not to say that no one has tried or that we haven't done that, but, like, how can we push that forward more? And I don't know what the right answer is. You just see it in who is on the police force, that it isn't really diverse. So hopefully that answers.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's move to our next question here. So, what is your vision or plan for the city to do more to support minority-owned businesses? And how would you, as a city council member, recruit, encourage, and provide support for Black business owners looking to open in or relocate to Robbinsdale?
So I think on this one, it's just really being aggressive about courting independent businesses and making sure that people know that we want new businesses in Robbinsdale, and trying to make it appealing for them to open new businesses. I mean, if there's any way of making sure that people are aware of our diverse community, and again, it's like education and communication, we definitely should be doing that. We have an EDA, we have a Chamber of Commerce. So I know that they do outreach and are looking to support businesses and bringing new businesses to town. And then it's really about, I would think that there's an element of, we have minority-owned businesses in Robbinsdale, so listening to them and or communicating to them that, that here's why it's a good idea to open in Robbinsdale. I mean, the one thing that I think of in the back of my mind is, like, we can't just, like, make sure, there's no way for the city to say, like, this is going to be a successful business and we're going to make sure that it's just, like, we can't have preferential treatment like that. We don't, like, inherently keep businesses afloat that are going out of business as a city. So there is that element of, like, what's the right fit, who wants to open their business here based on the things that Robbinsdale can do, and making sure that people are aware of those things, but what we can do to help support businesses, making sure that entrepreneurs are aware of those things.
Okay, great. Thank you. So this group has one more prepared question for you. So before we get to that, I just want to remind the group that if you're thinking along the lines of any follow-up questions, now would be a great time to pop them in the chat. After this question, Nick, I might open your microphone. I know you put a link to an article. We'll get to that in a second. I know it's related to the blue line, but I haven't had time to read the article in the middle of our discussion here. So we'll come to you for a little bit of context there. So our last question, last prepared question, I should say. How would you leverage your role as a city council member to foster a more racially just Robbinsdale?
So I think from my perspective, I have my areas of focus, which are community connections, balanced growth, and a focus on public health and safety. And I think that those areas all encompass racial equity, for Robbinsdale, but I think the first one is the most important, those community connections, because like I said before, it's like, if you know your neighbor as a person, as someone that you're willing to help or that is willing to help you, I mean, that to me is kind of the fiber or the fabric of Robbinsdale that makes it unique, is that we do have, I think, stronger connections within our communities than most of the places around us, where neighbors take care of one another, that they're looking out for one another. And it might not be more than just like your next door neighbor or across the alley or across the street, but those connections are really important, and it's part of what makes Robbinsdale unique. And so in my mind, if we expand those connections, people feel safer, they feel more part of the community, it feels more inclusive. And so from my perspective, I think that is, it's like, as a city council member, I want to do everything I can to make sure that, you know, we have ways of, and right now it's a little bit tricky because we've got this pandemic going on, but in, you know, this isn't going to be forever. So in a normal scenario of like, what are the ways that we can get, you know, our communities together and really bring different communities together? So whether it's, you know, having the police visit a, you know, an apartment complex, or as a city council member going and visiting, you know, an apartment complex, or, you know, having more events in our parks that, you know, it's like we have our neighboring, the Cleveland neighborhood has Live on the Drive. And I know that a ton of people from Robbinsdale, you know, go to that. And it's amazing. I mean, it's just like, everybody is there. It was like, we went to the very first one and there was like 50 people, and now you go and the entire stretch of the drive is full. So we can do things like that in Robbinsdale and find ways to get our community together and bring over our friends from the Cleveland neighborhood and North Minneapolis. But it's just like, to me, that's going to be a big piece. I mean, the other thing is making sure and finding ways, and I don't know if it's a task force or, you know, like an email account or something within the city where we can get more communication from people if it's anonymous. So I know one of the issues is that like a lot of these stories end up being anecdotal and not really like, here's what happened and this is the time and this was the place, because people feel like they're already threatened. They don't want to like bring more scrutiny on themselves. So is there a way to build a chorus of, hey, this isn't just like, you know, my neighbor feels like what, you know, they're being followed. When did that happen? Well, I don't know. You know, it's like getting those stories and understanding what is really happening in the community and finding ways for people to communicate to the city what's going on. And again, I mean, I don't know the exact right answer on that. And I know there's been some work on it, but I think doing more things like that, because at the end of the day, if, you know, if people feel like they're being profiled, if they feel like they're being discriminated against, if they don't feel like there's equity, like we have to address that. We have to resolve that. But we can't, I mean, we've got to have the data. And again, I mean, there's, you know, there's a lot of information that I think we're starting to get more transparency from public safety and do things like that. But it just, we need more information.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I have a couple of thoughts myself, but I'll let the just around transparency. I do agree. I guess I will just think out loud here. I think when you're talking about data, it's like the data must be there somewhere, but I think that's perhaps a frustration with maybe particular people in this group, like just not having that communication or those connections to know what's going on. So anyhow, thanks for letting me think out loud.
No, it's all good.
For a moment, but yeah, so that wraps up all of the prepared questions that we have for you. So I would like to allow the group to ask follow-up questions, and you can do that, of course, by the chat, as I mentioned. Otherwise, you know, turn on your camera and wave. Nick, I see your camera's on. Can I open your microphone? Nick was the one who posted the the link there. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, so maybe you can give us a little context.
Yeah, so that was just in response to your comment that, you know, the Blue Line project was put on hold, but there has been some resurfacing of a desire to reboot it with the support of Tim Alts. So it's something that we should, as a community, continue to support. So that's all that link is about, just kind of a story of since, I think, the first week of October. There's some news that popped up in regards to trying to work on an alternative route that will allow them to continue that project. I'm not sure if you were aware of that or not, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see that specific article, so I'll definitely read it. But yeah, I'm aware that they're looking at alternative routes, and actually a group that included members of the council, so representatives from Robbinsdale, met with the governor about this project. So I know that there are things happening, but we just have to keep that focus on. And I mean, I just know there's so many people in Robbinsdale that were really, I mean, there are people that moved to Robbinsdale because of the light rail. And I want to make sure that it's not only does the project happen, but that it comes through Robbinsdale.
Great. Good. Well, thank you, Nick. Thanks for sending that article too. I'm sure many of us will check it out. Amy, Nick, sorry, did you have another question?
I did. I have a question to follow up from the second question asked, and it's a hypothetical, and I know we all love hypotheticals, but I'm going to give a hypothetical because you did mention that you do have people in Ward 2 that have varying views, and I am no stranger to that reality in our community as well. But the hypothetical is this: we have 50% of the community that you represent that say they support flying a Black Lives Matter flag, for example. We have the other 50% that say they absolutely don't. And it falls on you as a leader to just make that final call. Like, how do you make those sort of decisions?
Yeah, I mean, again, it kind of comes back to the idea of, we can talk about, and I can personally support Black Lives Matter, but the flip side of that is that, okay, if we go down that road and I am saying, let's do this because we as a community support Black Lives Matter, and we want to make sure that we're vocal about that from the city's perspective, to me, it opens up the fact that there are people that are going to want to that then say, well, I don't agree with that. I want to fly my flag. And there's going to be, again, in your hypothetical, let's say it's 50-50. And now I can't be, from a city perspective, I can't say this expression of speech is okay. And this expression I agree with it. And so that's okay. But this one that I don't agree with is bad. And so I'm not going to allow that, because what ends up happening is then the city gets sued and we go to court over the fact that we didn't give people free speech. And so to me, if it's like, we're not going to, I just think like, I want to think of the entire perspective of that. It's like, yes, I'm fine with flying the Black Lives Matter flag, but then we have to also then be willing to say, like, everything we don't want to fly is we are going to need to make that okay too. And so to me, I would rather say, let's support Black Lives Matter in any other myriad of ways that doesn't involve flying the flag at City Hall.
Let me ask in a different way that's a little bit less controversial in terms of freedom of speech, and be it a decision about changing a park structure, or changing or adding a stop sign, or just any of the nuances of things where you've got two sides of the community, and again, it's 50-50, and say that, what's to say, like, one's a stop sign because there's been cases and cases and cases of car accidents or kids almost getting hit, or just again, this is a hypothetical, and but you got 50% of people saying, we don't need it, it impinges on my freedom, I should have the right to be responsible for my driving behaviors, and I don't need a stop sign to tell me to stop. So
right.
How would you handle that sort of scenario?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a hypothetical, and I don't think that those ever play out as 50-50, but there are processes for getting a stop sign or making a traffic change. And I would, you know, if the community goes through that process, because I think it's like you got to have over 50% of your neighbors want to have the study and do, I'm all for it. So it's again, a stop sign. I mean, in that sense, it's like if there have been accidents and it keeps happening over and over again. I mean, I think maybe even a good example would be like speeding, right? People are speeding, and there's an issue around the fact that you can never eradicate speeding, right? Like there are going to be people who are speeding. But are there things we can try that we haven't tried yet to address speeding and maybe do some things that would make people think twice or reconsider their speeding? And so to me, I think that's it. It's like in the bigger picture, it's not like here's this one thing you can do to stop speeding. That's not going to exist. So like, let's try to do the things that we can do to address the issues and the concerns. So yeah, I mean, an element of that is listening to the community and hearing what they have to say. But if I only talk to 5 people or 6 people and 3 of them say, I think this, and 3 of them say, I think the opposite, well, okay, let's get a larger sample and understand what's going on. And again, let's say that it's 70-30, that people don't want the Black Lives Matter flag or don't want, you know, a stop sign. That doesn't always mean that that's the only action we can take, right? Like that we absolutely can't do this thing. But it's just, I guess from my perspective, and my answer is really around the context of we have to be open to all the voices. And I just feel like it's, I don't know, does that help you understand like my thought process? I'm listening. I want to listen to the community. I want to hear what the community has to say. And if it's overwhelmingly like, this is what we're going to do, 90% of people say we have to do this, then I definitely am taking that into account. But at some point, like I also am going to make some decisions, and I think that I have to take into account, like, what are all the tools at our disposal to support whatever it is that we're trying to do and get a good outcome.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Answer. Yeah.
Sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
No, that's cool.
That's okay. Thanks, Nick, for that question. I want to see if anyone else, I don't see anything in the chat at the moment. Anyone else have a question? You're welcome to. Oh.
I'm going to ask another question. This is the question I ask everyone.
Yeah.
So I'm, you know, listening to constituents and talking about, you know, getting feedback from the community and community outreach, and you talked about really concrete examples of how to do those things with, you know, community events to bring people together and connect the community. And, you know, the reason why I asked this question is, you know, I've lived in Robbinsdale for roughly 5 years, and it wasn't until about 7 months ago I knew who my council member represented, like who represented Ward 3. Mm-hmm. And so there's been at least 1 election cycle between that, and I don't think until now I never was aware. And part of that is, you know, on me as, you know, an individual to be a little bit more curious about local government, but the reality of the situation, a reality of just the reality of it is that not everyone is that interested. We've got busy lives. Mm-hmm. Some people just don't think to local government. So what are some ways as a leader would you reach out to people that might not be looking to local government because they're not paying attention?
Right.
What are some additional tools that you think that you can bring to the table to make sure that people know that you're representing them? Whereas so people like me know who's representing me.
Yep. No, that's a good question. So, I mean, I'm on social media, and I know, again, it's like if you're not paying attention, it's not like you're going to all of a sudden pay attention to that. But having that out there and being accessible from that perspective, I mean, I include my phone number on my website. It's like, if you have a question, if you have an issue, give me a call. I mean, I have definitely talked to residents that had like a very specific issue based on where they are in Ward 2. And so I think there's an element of like when major things are happening in the city, in a neighborhood or whatever, if it's like street construction or if it's, making a major change to like adding signs or doing something. It's not like, let's not just do that and then hope that the communication gets out there, that like I need to actually be proactive, go and knock on doors, go and tell people like, here's what's going on. And granted, I'm not going to talk to everyone, but I'm maybe going to interact with some people that otherwise would not be hearing from the usual channels of, the city. I mean, I miss stuff on the city Facebook and mailings. I feel like, it just, things get out, the information is out there, but you have to know how to find it. So I think there are elements of making our website more interactive, or at least a little bit better of a like user experience. I know all the information is there, but it's sometimes not easy to find things. I think my own like personal, like engaging in areas where there's something going on, if there was an incident or a question, or they're making a major change to infrastructure or whatever it is, like make sure that people are aware of that and I can control that. And then I think I kind of mentioned the idea of like going and visiting, like let's have, a barbecue and it'll be me and the police at Beach South for a couple hours, or, have like show a movie in the park where, let's work with the community to understand like what do they want, and get out there and do some of those things. And just being, I mean, again, it's kind of like a proactive, but I don't know that we do a lot of that right now. So to me, that can help.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thanks for another question, Nick. Anyone else? Last chance before we start to wrap up. If you do have a question, give me a wave. You can raise your hand. I think you can raise your hand in Zoom here. Otherwise, pop it in the chat. And as perhaps if anyone has any questions, we can address them. But first, Jason, you mentioned, you have a website, you've got ways to contact you on the website. Can you just tell this group a little bit more on how to get in touch with you if there are more questions?
Yeah, so my website is jason4birdtown.org. So jasonforbirdtown.org. Pretty much all of my stuff is Jason for Birdtown. So my email is jasonforbirdtown@gmail.com. My Twitter handle, and I'm on Instagram, that's Jason for Birdtown.
Did you say, I'm sorry, for your website, was it .com or .org?
.org.
.org,
so,
okay.
Yeah,
I'm putting
so
these in the chat.
Okay, yeah, so it's jasonforbirdtown.org is my website. Thank you for clarifying. And then, yeah, so I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter. I have like my political Facebook, I think is also like facebook.com/jasonforbirdtown.
Okay.
And yeah, and then that has all that, all the sites, everything like has all the other contact information. So perfect. It's all out there.
Cool. I also want to just acknowledge Jennifer. Jennifer said in the chat, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us, Jason. And I will echo that message as well. So yes, I think we can wrap up here. I just want to say thank you again, Jason, for meeting with us again. And I'd also like to thank the Robbinsdale for Racial Justice group for supporting this project with the scheduling and formulating the questions as well. So yeah, I've said it. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say thanks for having me, and thanks for the questions. And I mean, I say it all the time, but I would love any feedback if you think that I'm just totally wrong on something or need to do more of something else. I definitely would love to hear that.
Great. We appreciate that. And I was just going to say, I know that this group is going to be really awesome about voting. But once again, I'll just remind you, get those people in your life who you think might be on the fence about getting out and voting. Just reach out to them, make sure they know how and when and where to vote. And if you do need any info for voting, you can go, one place you can go is hennepin.us/elections. So thank you again so much. Thank you everyone for hanging out and listening and being here. Again, thanks Jason, and best of luck.
Yeah,
Have
thank
a good
you.
night, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.